Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Crafting Leadership podcast. So I'm Mac. I'm Principal Craftsperson at Codurance, and I'm joined today by...
Hi, I'm Simon. I'm the Regional Director for Codurance in Manchester, and as of yesterday, a new office in Leeds.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alan. I'm Regional Director for Codurance in London.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, guys. So last time we did have a discussion around like the importance of the vision, mission, and asking the why for like most of the projects you're working on, and how important it is to create also in a collaborative way with the team members and also with your stakeholders, ideally as well. So today we'll go a bit further. So we assume we already have the vision, we know what the mission is. And how do we keep communicating that vision and mission to both our team members and our stakeholders, and also assuming that some of that original vision may be changing through time as well. So how do we manage that? But before we go into that subject, just let's start with a small icebreaker, shall we? So like, from your experience, like how many projects do you think, and can you recall, actually had that kind of vision, and a leader that's, was driving this throughout the project? Or maybe there are also situations where you don't really need that. So I just want to put that on the table. What do you guys think?
I feel like it's the exception in my experience that it's been articulated, clearly, and it's stuck with people. It's been well understood. So I can think of a few instances where that's been done and done well. But I've got to be honest, I think in the majority of cases, it's either not been done or hasn't been done effectively, which I know we'll talk about a bit more. So yeah, not too many from my experience, Mark. Yeah, Alan, for you?
I think it's hard to judge a lot of the time from my position, because I've been for a little while now in sort of leadership positions on these projects. So I've always been pretty clear about the vision, and you think you've told people. Whether you have or not is something else. But no, I think most of the time, especially in my recent career, there's been a pretty good vision associated with the project. But again, it's hard to know whether that was ever used in a useful way as part of the project, and whether that was communicated effectively and the team bought into it.
That's a good point, actually. So I guess didn't make that distinction, but I think it's an important one, isn't it? Was there a vision? I think, yeah, I'm with Alan. In most instances, yes. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have got funding and that sort of stuff for a new project or initiative. But how well it was then communicated and digested, is perhaps another point, isn't it? But yeah, I think an important distinction. In most instances, yes, a vision, but how well communicated.
Yeah, I think a lot of projects you start with the good vision and the good intentions, and everyone's on board, and then sort of life gets in the way a little bit, and it's easy to get driven then purely by the usual metrics of deadlines and sort of budgets and things like this on projects, and you can forget it. But it's an incredibly useful fallback for decision making when things do get pinched. So are we making a decision for the right reason? And that's when it should start to come up again. And at least from a leadership point of view, it should be forefront of your thinking.
Okay, so it seems that it may be the case that at some point it may, as you mentioned, Alan, I guess, like fizzle out in some way, right? So I guess it's a natural, maybe you can go into that, communicating that vision continuously, right? So let's maybe start with communicating to your team members, right? So communicating down the chain of commands, as you might call it. So how would you do it, or from your experience, what was your approach to communicating that vision? Let's start with, it's set up and it's like the early stages and this early communication. Like, where do we go from here? Some one-on-ones or like general discussions? And what was your approach, let's say?
Yeah, so I'd normally start with a project kickoff. So there'd be some basic elements of the project you'd want to describe to the group that would be working on it, and one of them certainly would be the vision alongside proposed timeline and work done to date and stakeholders and all the other things you might want to get across. So a project kickoff, whether that utilizes something as sort of on the nose as a PowerPoint deck or whether it's just a discussion, depending on the size of the work and complexity of what's going on. But I'd start with that always. And if the team was particularly big and the problem space particularly complicated, I'd probably start with the team leads and the senior people in the group to keep it small and take the first round of questions and make sure the messaging was clear. And then I'd move on to trying to either get them to communicate that to the rest of the group, or to take a refined message down to the rest of the people after that as well. So yeah, that sort of project kickoff would be the initial way.
So would you, Alan, for example, announce it, so like get all the team leads and announce it like in a session, let's say, but I guess would you continue the conversation in your one-on-ones as well? I guess not in terms of communicating, because that's already happened, but I guess aligning possibly.
Yeah, it sort of becomes I mean, if you're talking about, you know, why you're doing something, it becomes the anchor that you sort of go back to when questions are asked or decisions are made. If you're trying to say why you're making a decision, it's a good reason a good thing to do is to go back to the vision and help to support your decision using those kind of things, and also encourage people to think about it when making their own decisions. So there's lots of different ways that could come up. It could be just an ad hoc conversation. It could be in a one-to-one. It could be in a planning meeting around, you know, just a meeting or something. There's so many times when things come up where people could go left, they could go right, and it's useful to just restate why we're here, what we're doing, and then make sure that's factored into the decisions people are making and your own decisions as well. So it should sort of permeate everything when you're running the project.
Something Alan's just said there has just, you know, sparked another thought there. So I agree on that point. I think having a kickoff, getting the team together, certainly initially, rather than doing one-to-one type briefings. But I remember some actually quite useful instances where perhaps the team working on a project would work in the same space, maybe even the same room. And I, do remember the project vision or some kind of mission statement being on the wall. And it was really useful at times, particularly if you're going through some sticky points during the project, or perhaps you felt you were deviating from what you originally set out to do, to actually physically point back to the mission statement, or remember why we're doing this, or should we just think about the reason why we're delivering this project, and almost checking yourself. And that now feels like something that's less straightforward to do, perhaps in the kind of hybrid virtual world we're in now, where the people aren't in the office or in a physical space quite so often, able to point to a diagram or a statement. So yeah, I don't know whether there's any other techniques for replacing that physical reminder in a virtual and hybrid world. There probably is.
Yeah, I remember the first project I was involved in that was done from inception right through to delivery, fully remote. And this was because we were scheduled to do the inception, I think it was like in early April, and then we got locked down in late March, wasn't it? 2020, something like that. And so we were going to do the inception on site, and then that got changed to remote. So the whole project started from there. And one of the things that stands out about that project for me was it was around child educational psychology, and a platform that supported the processes that the council ran around that. And the people that we spoke to at the council who were instigating the project and running it were just incredibly passionate about the process, how it helped kids avoid suspension and exclusion at school, how it supported their educational needs right from very young, like 6-7 years old, this kind of thing. Very, very passionate about it. So I'd say I'd like to intentionally say that I leveraged that through the project, but it just kind of happened that because they were very involved and very passionate and not particularly technical, the vision that they had for why the platform needed to exist and the good it did in the world. And it's not very often you could say a piece of software does genuine good in the world, but this one had the potential. That by keeping them close to the project and by having them speak to the team a lot through the natural sort of processes you have in Scrum, they were constantly a reminder of why we were doing the project, and something much more useful than because we're making money as a consultancy or because we're doing some cool things with tech. There was a genuine vision there. So keeping them involved and close to it meant that the team were constantly bought into the vision. So that helped in a remote situation, having passionate stakeholders and keeping those Scrum ceremonies going on a regular basis and keeping them close to them. That was really useful. So they were our little poster on the wall in some ways. Every time they popped up on a call, you knew you knew what they were doing before they got there and what they were going to do afterwards, and that was quite inspirational.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's almost replacing that. Is that anchor, isn't it, throughout the
delivery
phases to remind you of why you're doing it, even if you're not physically able to point to something and collectively see a statement or a vision on a wall.
You could see the way it motivated people, because the easiest project you ever have to manage, right? Because the people put the extra time in. They care that little bit more than they would if it was some vanilla IT project.
Yeah, I had very something similar when I was leading a team that we are creating online registration portal for kids hospital, right? So there's like young mothers, they will need to travel, and it's like a very specialist hospital. So that's like throughout the country, people travel there for like some specialist treatment. And before that, they had to call or even go there because they couldn't get on the call. And so that was like didn't need like a vision yourself. It just was there, right? It's just everyone knew why we are doing this. I remember those days like in the office, let's say, where also if there was a vision, right? So for the project, it's there always. Everyone passes by tens of times a day, and they even put stickies in there, some ideas. So it seems to me, for me, it's not as easy in the remote time as well. But we have some like options, like for example, I use the Miro boards, and whenever I can, there's a team meeting, I try to bring it up at least, right? So not sure what you are using.
No, your Miro boards are well beyond my Miro powers, so we don't use them as effectively as that. I think I lean on tools a lot less than I think you might do. I talk to people, you know me. I like to talk, so I tend to use more of the one-to-ones and the meetings, and try and just make sure the way I talk about the project reminds people of the overall overarching purpose as regularly as possible. So yeah, less Miro board, more chat in my situation.
Cool. Awesome. So maybe we can go to the next point today. So we did the communication, right? So we had our one-on-ones throughout some period of time, and also collectively we're discussing the vision. But I guess what would be the cues after some point, I guess, for you as a lead to know that you effectively communicated that vision to your team members? Like, what would be the cues? What you would be looking for, or what would indicate that wasn't really successful and you need to do a bit more work in that regard?
I think you always need to do a bit more work. I think that's one thing to say. I don't think you've ever sort of successfully communicated it and then you stop. It's something I've learned, that the power of the status quo, the power to people just to revert to their natural way of thinking about problems is huge. So you have to constantly bang on about the vision and about the behavior you want to see as a result of it. It's a constant process. I mean, how I would know if they were doing it is I would see them utilizing it in their day-to-day decision making. So you would maybe see people putting it on demo decks as reasoning for the features being selected, or just even as some context at the start of a demonstration presentation, maybe, or even a conversation during planning or an architecture review or something like that, where the vision is mentioned as a sort of like I say, as an anchor for the decisions being taken. So you just want to see them demonstrating behaviors which reflect the value of it.
That one's good. So yeah, and just building on that, I think what I'd look for is just some indication that the vision has been understood, expresses hopefully some enthusiasm for it, and so people are motivated, and people are bringing that sense of purpose to what they're doing, because they understand. You both describe really well a couple of projects that had a societal value. So that's great. I guess not everything does, of course. So, is the team able to demonstrate that they get it and that there is a purpose for what they're doing? And I think the other way of being able to gauge that the vision has been understood is, do you then hear other people without you saying it kind of repeat the vision perhaps to other people, almost cascading it down or socializing it to other people? That's brilliant, particularly if it's not only the vision but perhaps the vision plus, so people have added something to it. That I think is a great sign.
Yeah, like from my perspective, I remember like one of the projects I set up a channel specifically to discuss strategy for this particular project. And I saw the moment where it actually kicked in at some point, where there wasn't much traction in there. And at some point, there were more and more discussion, more and more, thoughts being in there. And not only, I guess, asking questions around the existing vision, but how to extend it. And that's what I was looking for as a lead, for example, like what is still missing there, how it can be extended, and what we should take under consideration going forward, which we didn't consider at the beginning, right? So that was an interesting thing, I guess, in the remote world to have this kind of a strategy channel. If your project is long enough, I guess, if it's 2-3 months, it might be tricky, I guess, to get proper traction, I guess. But if it's like a proper modernization, greenfield project, 6 months plus, then that's definitely something I would repeat, let's say, personally.
Yeah, I think you're looking to create advocates, aren't you? Especially in a larger project team, you can't be everywhere, so you're looking to create advocates within the team. And I think one of the more interesting one is if you get challenged with it back at you, so you're discussing a certain path through a project or a solution to a problem, and someone chucks that sort of core reasoning for being there back at you. I think you've started to succeed, at least in that regard. It's easy to get driven yourself off in a different direction. Yeah, you're always looking to create leaders and create people who support the vision as well.
Yeah, and actually that might be interesting because I don't know, maybe at some point it will be it will be lengthy project, but you maybe let's say move to a different project and you need to think about your, let's call it a succession plan, I guess, right? So who would be leading this thing after you, right? So obviously you can wait till the end and it's like, okay, here it is, whoever wants to take it, thank you very much, I'm off, right? So that wouldn't be, I guess, the best and professional thing to do, right? Probably you would like to see and spot these members who are like more active in terms of those discussion mission meetings and yeah, I guess curate that in some way and prepare them that maybe they'll be the best ones leading that after yourself as well.
Yeah, I was always told that the more senior you get and the more people you manage, the longer you should be able to go on holiday, right? Which is the theory, right? It barely works, right? But if you're good at managing, you should be able to create systems and processes and people around you that allow you to leave your job and come back, and it should all still be running for a decent amount of time, right? And I think the vision, the why of what you're doing becomes a really key part of what happens while you're not there. So if you go away for 3 months, do you come back to some horrible autocratic sort of bullying culture or something like this? Or do you come back to a completely different picture than you left? Or do you come back to something that represents the vision and the mission that you've instilled into the people around you? So it becomes useful for that as well, so that you don't have to be involved in everything all the time to push the direction of the work being done. You should be able to set these sort of guidelines and boundaries represented by the vision and let it run. So it's a really useful tool as a manager in not having to be involved in everything if you can use it effectively.
And one interesting thing also from my experience, so at one instance, for example, when I was brought in to take over leadership, it's like I was having those initial discussions with the existing team members, and the main thing I was asking about the technical things, about the technical stack, and but the main thing was they were always mentioning, most important thing for them was that the existing or previous leadership was, they just didn't get what they were expecting from them. It wasn't clear enough, wasn't someone they could follow. It's going back, I guess, to our initial question, right? So like, does every project need that? I think that's true, right? That was the initial conversation. That's what my experience leads, where when I took over that project, this is what they were striving for. It's like they knew they will figure out, they're going to figure out the technical stuff, but like having a proper leadership and, you know, with mission and vision, and that everyone can believe in and align towards, that was the most important thing they were striving for.
I've seen it go bad as well. So I've seen I worked on a project where they were trying to improve the operational efficiency of a data entry process. So they were getting lots of company financial data into the organization, and people were keying it in, because I don't know how much you know about company, sort of the way company financials are published. The format of them is pretty inconsistent. They're not, you know, they have different levels of data depending on industry and not all sorts of stuff. They're not standardized. So people were keying this in. And a vendor came into the organization and pitched the idea of natural language processing to deal with these kind of things. Now, the tool was sold, but the reality of the tool was something else. But the mission and vision of the project should have been to save X amount of hours, or deliver an improvement in processing time, or something like this, or to better serve our customers with more timely data, something in this kind of region. But the mission of the project very quickly became use NLP to do a thing. And this was very, very toxic, because when it became clear to almost everybody involved that the tool was never going to cut it, all the solution was to make tons of compromises in order to still include the tool in the solution, but still solve the problem. And there were many other ways coming out of the team that the problem could have been solved, but maybe not as well as the NLP was supposed to do it. It was, but better than it was going to do it in reality. But the mission got lost, and everyone was just driving towards, how can we make this thing work? How can we put other structures around it, other bits of software around it to make it most effective? And I think that was the one that jumps out to me, where the mission got warped from what it should have done to being a technical direction, and it you know, it was damaging, I think, to the success of the project.
What did you do at that point, Alan? Was there any attempt to, you know, like regroup and revisit that original purpose?
So I guess I'm going to look kind of slopey shouldered in this case, but I was a part of a program, and the decisions on these things were taken above my pay grade at that point. But so yeah, we were trying to communicate alternatives to the solution, but I wasn't able to affect it in any particular way. So we just did the best job we did the best job we could. But it was a really good thing to observe from my point of view, you know, with regards to how projects can get driven by technology as opposed to being driven by the actual vision, outcome, mission, however you want to put it, that they should be driven by. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to admit to one where I was responsible for it. That's for sure.
Of course not. No. But I think it's quite a bold thing to do, isn't it? Really, to actually almost kind of halt the project and say, you know, we need to regroup here. We need to revisit why we're doing this. I think it's the sort of thing that's easy to say in this kind of conversations, but actually to enact that, I think takes some, some strong leadership, and you need
you can see that by the time we got involved, it was probably too late. So by the time the vendor had been signed up and the decision had been made, there was lots of people's reputations maybe involved in what came next. So, you know, the point, once they accepted the tool was capable of achieving what they wanted to achieve, it became very difficult to backtrack on that. So
sure.
They if there was an opportunity, it would have been to assess the tool in some kind of more thorough way against the outcomes. But yeah, like you say, easy to say, which is why I only hold it up as a good lesson for me that it's been a good lesson for me to watch out for certain signs with regards to technology driving projects in the future.
Interesting. So I think that leads us nicely to the second part of our discussion, which is communicating the vision up the chain of command. So what you mentioned, Alan, is a bit, at some point in the project, some things turn out not to be the these decisions. But let's maybe start from the beginning. So communicating that vision like at the early stages of the project, let's say. So, and why is that, or is it actually that as important as communicated to your team members as well?
I think it is important. I mean, I don't know if it's more important or I'd just say equally important. I think to do that, I think communication at all levels is is key here. I think probably a few reasons from my perspective. You want to just check that that vision is coherent, it's well understood, and supported by, let's say, execs or your kind of senior leadership team. Does that vision align with the overall organization kind of vision and strategy? Because that would be the worst thing to do, to be going off in a certain direction. It's a well articulated vision, but if it's taking a product, say, or a service, or even an organization in a which is contrary to the rest of the organization, obviously that's a poor thing to do. So I think alignment, I guess, is what I'm saying, Maciek, is important here. And also, I think the other key reason is, from my perspective, I'm sure there's others here, to get buy-in and support straight away, because as we all know, programs, they're not straight lines. They're not always easy to execute. So at some stage, you're probably going to need some support, whether that's a bit of air cover if things are going wrong, somebody actually stepping in and then providing some support and guidance or leadership, maybe extra resource or time, whatever it may be. There might be some changes to the way you deliver a project that require some buy-in, outside the team domain from, let's say, an exec team. So if you've skipped that stage, it's then a difficult conversation then to start talking to people about, could we have a conversation about this, or do you think you could lend some support? I mean, for what? People might think, well, you didn't involve me initially, so it's difficult for me to now understand where you are in that journey. So I think, yeah, it's hugely important, just as important as communicating kind of side and downwards, I would say.
Yeah. So from what I would add to that definitely is from my experience is like, let's say one meeting is not enough, right? So I had a situation where we had an initial meeting with the stakeholder. There was some kind of what she expects from us on like an overarching level, let's say. Okay. And so I went back to the team. We came up with our own like ways of working and what we want to achieve on the like higher level. And it was quite a lengthy process. So I went for a couple of weeks, and then without consulting, went straight to the first demo. And then when it all kind of fell apart, it's not what she had in mind. It's good, but probably we need to work a bit. So there wasn't any problem with that. We had conversations after that, but it was that bit awkward situation that I should have had more meetings with her along the way as I was discussing this with the team as well. So that's a lesson from my experience, that one meeting, and it seems that after one meeting everything is clear. It's not as much as you feel it. Like it's just not.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one, this, because there's in a consultancy, there's a number of different ways you sort of interact with this idea of managing up the chain, or putting the value, communicating the value up the chain. Because say as a project manager on a consultancy, you've got two audiences that are interested. There's the senior stakeholders within the client, and then there's your management within the consultancy itself. So, and you have to deal with both of them in different ways. So the part of the mission and vision that the client's going to be interested in is, are you on board with why the business are doing things, and are you delivering effectively? Do your people know their stuff, and do they understand our technology domain and these kind of things? And you have to make sure that you communicate your approach to those problems effectively to that person, so they have confidence in you and believe that your services are of value, right? So you have to do that to them. But then outside of that, into in our case, Codurance, the management are going to be much more interested in the health of the engagement and the potential for doing more work with that company, and how well the team are, how the team are feeling about working on the engagement as well. So you need to be able to communicate your approach or vision, mission, whatever it is, to those things, to that audience, in a way that gets their support for what you're doing as well. So you've got And then, you know, we've already covered doing the same for the team in both regards. So I think you've got two different things that you need to, audiences certainly in broadest sense, that you need to think about as a consultant in this environment. I think you then also have, you know, within any company, you have that sort of any internal initiatives you might be working on where your manager is a more direct stakeholder, and again, you then treat them a little more like a client in that regard. So how you choose to do this and approach it depends on which situation you're in. But the whole benefit of getting their confidence and getting their buy-in is, as Simon was saying a minute ago, is going to when things go wrong, let's say politely, that you've got that support, and that you don't, it's not instant sort of critique and maybe a worse sort of micromanagement over your approach. You get a bit of backup into why you're doing things and the change that you're trying to make. But yeah, how you do it exactly, I think is very personal. Like I've done it quite effectively with clients through meeting them, you know, just meeting them regularly, talking to them regularly, asking them what do you want from this? Because it might not always be obvious. You know, sometimes people want, you know, the same thing that the person who initiated the project wants, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they've got baggage they're carrying around, and you need to adapt your message around the vision, or the elements of the vision you're communicating, to their personal circumstances. So yeah, it's you know, how you do it, I think, is dependent on who you're dealing with, the situation that you're in, but you should spend a lot of time doing it. You know, it's more than you think. You know, it comes into stakeholder management, doesn't it, all of this in kind of project management terms, and it should be a large amount of your time doing that kind of thing, I think.
I think that's a really important point, and an experience that I've just had here at Codurance with one of our client engagements. So we delivered a piece of work which was essentially a discovery phase for several weeks, and the first part of that discovery was very much around understanding, documenting, clarifying, you know, the vision for that project. And initially there was a little bit of pushback. Oh, do we need to spend quite that amount of time going through this? You know, we know what it is. We've been through this already. Should we just kind of get on with it almost from certain quarters? And actually, there were a couple of things that came out. One, it was really worthwhile because we got to a point of really understanding that vision, and everybody did get it in quotes through having an opportunity to listen to different perspectives on it, and listen to effectively the sponsor articulate that themselves. But also in doing so, there were some really good workshops which just built, you know, a good sense of team early on. And so before the work moved into, let's say, the delivery phase, you know, the team dynamics were good, and so it proved beneficial from that perspective as well. So it's almost like a side benefit of going through that kind of stakeholder piece that Alan alluded to there. I think can be something that comes out of the kind of the visioning and communicating phase. And if you skip it, then perhaps you're also skipping a bit of the team building side of getting the project up and running.
Yeah, first thing that people will generally get advised to get is consensus, not necessarily agreement. You want everybody with a common understanding of the problem space and what we're trying to achieve. They don't necessarily all have to like it, all have to agree with it. True. But they do have to know they all have to know the same thing. So that's kind of what you go for. The process you described there, Simon, would have done exactly that, right? Getting everybody around, talking, hearing each other's perspectives. They would have at least understood a common message by the end, and that's kind of what's important, I think. Yeah. So I mean, and not to sorry, I know but not to neglect the idea of just making the people above you look good as well as a reason to do all of these things, you know. So if they're able to effectively communicate what you're doing and you don't somehow contradict them to somebody else, then it makes them look like they're in control of what's going on around them, and they're in the know, and that's a very useful thing if you ever need support as well.
it's like you want to make this to be their idea. That they're then thinking it was their idea from the beginning, which is a bit, yeah, interesting tactic, right? But I guess that's
yeah, at least at the very least buy-in, right? At the very, there's occasions with certain personality types where it's really useful to have them think it. People think that all the ideas are theirs, but not everybody needs that, I don't think. But to have them bought into it and understanding it, and had their chance to question, inquire, and maybe steer things slightly, is very useful, especially further down the line.
So maybe just last question before we wrap up. So in terms of the alignments, obviously, so like for example, in your positions, like how much would you expect when this kind of discussion happens to know about the realities of how it is there, on the ground, basically. So how are the realities, and how, what you think might be the best, might be hindered a bit by how the realities work for the team, and there are some roadblocks and typical problems, so that how that is important for yourselves to understand before that final decision of the vision mission will be made, so that it's not, let's say, too detached of the realities of the.
So is the vision realistic? Is that what you mean? Is it useful to know?
I guess this is what I'm going. Yeah,
I think it's useful to an extent, but there's nothing wrong with having something which is aspirational. There's nothing wrong with having a big idea of, let's go back to the child psychology thing. We're going to stop every kid in the country being excluded from school. I mean, why not set that as the vision, but maybe not set it as the success criteria for the project, the thing that hangs your bonus on or something like that. Probably not quite so useful. And it's certainly not useful to go around bashing the team because they haven't saved 15 children from exclusion this week. But I do think, like lofty ambitions and visions for success are great. I think they really help people feel they're part of something. But you're, again, sort of communicating up, you need to make sure that is understood to be a lofty ambition and not exactly literally what we're going to do.
Awesome. Okay, so just to wrap up, maybe just final couple of words, is to summarize our conversation today, what you took out the most, what you think is the hallmark of today's conversation.
I think it just sort of emphasizes the importance of it. I think there's no doubt that having a solid vision and communicating it effectively is incredibly important to the success of a project, even if the project may even seem a bit kind of uninteresting. It's certainly a way of injecting something into that and showing that there is a bigger purpose to doing things. I think the other thing is how much time and attention you have to pay to doing this stuff. You've highlighted through this conversation, Mac, about that we need to go up, we need to go down, we need to go left, right. We've got different stakeholder groups, not even just literally straight above us and straight below, if you like. That they're all over the place, and the vision needs to go to all of them in a relevant and specific way. So we have our work cut out in doing this, and hearing other people talk as well shows me that if we, there's plenty of examples of if you don't do it very well, what can happen, and none of them are really very good. So it's probably worth spending some time on it.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things from me, Maciek, in terms of takeaways. I think we had an interesting discussion around vision and how that's communicated and articulated. Now we're in perhaps a different way of working. We're in a more hybrid virtual world. I kind of think, my sense here is that it's even more important that you invest time in doing that communication, both ways, sharing the vision and then listening to people's feedback and then refining it, but also the importance of it not being a one-off exercise. Certainly, if I go back to more kind of Prince type structured delivery, there'd be an initiation phase. Well, I think we've thankfully moved away from that now. So it's much more of a ongoing conversation, a reminder of the vision, which you'll get through, as Alan said, some of the more standard agile ceremonies and through different roles like product owners. There's an opportunity now to be constantly linking the work of the team back to the project vision. And I think those tools and techniques are really important, and we should continue to embrace them.
So from my side, if I can put one thing as a more like a tech lead, let's say, is that having that mission and vision in place enables the team, from what I saw, to be more innovative, right? So instead of just looking at a set of backlog items and just doing them one by one, they know what the overarching goal of this thing is here, and they see those that we should innovate to reach that goal beyond the existing backlog. This is what I saw. And I always love that because that's what I expect from my team, and having that mission and vision spurs that innovation seeking within the team. So I guess that would be my closing notes on the mission and vision. Okay, thank you very much for coming today, Simon, Alan, everyone joining us today, whether on YouTube or in you're hearing this through your headphones only. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Magic. Cheers, Alan.
Yeah, cheers, well, mate.